I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the world's most influential basketball podcast. Andrew, it's a brave new America that we are stepping into. Just 1 week ago today, we were so innocent. We dreamed of a magnificent Kamala Harris-led future. Where are we now? What happened?
I mean, I have to give you your dues. This is the result you wanted. This is exactly how you wanted to play out, right? Like a little shade at Kamala Harris. You're a never Harris voter, as we know from last episode. Whoever it was didn't really matter, right? It ends up being Trump. But were you pleased with the results?
Well, I think we'll get into this. I was just sort of leading into the show. I mean, there's plenty to talk about. We can get into what happened and
let's go.
how we experienced it. But, I would just want a little small talk, and I didn't even want to jump into like, how did Andrew get it so wrong? I look back last week, only 1 week ago, and Andrew boldly proclaims Kamala has it in the bag. Kamala in 4. She's about to sweep this guy. What happened, Andrew? What happened?
There were 15 million of you, and you got what you wanted. Allegedly 15 million. Those numbers are kind of being debated, but there were a lot of people who maybe voted for Biden before, who didn't come out and vote for Kamala Harris, which is complicated, but I mean, congratulations, man. You did it.
Before we get
I lost
into
this one. You won.
You keep jumping the gun on this. Let's talk about
it sounds like you're
night.
dodging the issue. Okay.
No, we're going to get into it. I'm going to take my victory lap, and you're going to take your just desserts for getting your prediction wrong.
I voted for Harris. I took the L.
Let's talk about the night in New York, because we remember election night with Barack Obama. I mean, granted, it was 12 years ago, but he was president 8 years ago, and that experience, the parties, the idea that this is like a social engagement, that election night, you go out and you put on your hat and you get the desired result. And then, as we discussed last show, when it goes left, the vibe shifts.
Yeah.
How was your election night? Where were you when the vibe shifted?
Well, as we've discussed for years, I am so washed that you can't really count on me for on the streets reporting, because I put my children to sleep and I was lights out myself by 9. So I woke up at like 3 a.m. just to check my phone. I intermittently had checked like at 11 once, maybe at like 1 a.m. once. And I was like, not looking good. I was like, that's a wrap. So by 3 o'clock, when I pried open my eyeballs to look at my phone, I had accepted that Donald Trump was going to be the next president. That was uneventful, but I am old, and I wouldn't have gone out anyway, as we talked on the last episode, because the probability of Harris losing was real. And being around sad people as a Knicks fan, I've learned, is not the best experience.
So my experience was a bit different. And I met up with some friends to have dinner. And one of them was, wearing the Realtree Harris Waltz hat, ready to watch the election and, get this W. And we went to a spot on Orchard Street. I walk in there and I see Dean Kissick there. And I was like, well, I already know this is going to be a slightly different scene than people may have thought. And then Okay, here's a twink in a MAGA hat. Here's, Elena Velez goths hanging out. And you're
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, this is definitely a more mixed crowd than
Oh, I
the
just said
typical
mixed.
New York City,
Yeah.
a typical New York City election party would be. Just because of the parties involved, there may have been some crypto in the mix. I don't even know who was behind this thing, but it was set up in an intentionally disorienting way, with four screens simultaneously playing four different channels. Audio
Mhm.
seemed kind of garbled. There was this hum that may have or may not have been, again, intentional, like this droning noise. But yeah, it was more avant garde, I guess one would say. On the upside, as the worm turned, there were there was not a complete lack of energy in the room because there was actually some Trumpers in the mix. So it really kept a more stable buoyancy than the parties I've been to in the past.
That is a better scenario than just like a wash of red or a wash of blue or real tree camo, right? Having a little bit here and there is the preferable scene.
Well, because I knew what it was. One of my friends
Mm,
did not identify the phenotypes of the Dime
mm.
Square right wing contingency and texted me the next day, like, why were we invited to a Trump party? I'm disgusted. I cannot believe that just happened. I was like, well, I don't know. I looked around the room and sort of gathered what was happening.
And the downtown scene that sides like kind of resides in that MAGA curious area is not like cut and dry. Obviously, the Turtle Bay podcasters, the fascist podcasters, have declared their allegiances, but I think that is generally viewed with some sort of performative skepticism. So when people present themselves as MAGA forward facing, I'm like, they're baiting you into a conversation. And that conversation usually ends up at a place being like, well, I'm not totally into Trump. Obviously, it's a bag, but there's certain things that I advocate for and certain things I cannot stand about liberals.
I just view it as an amalgam of troll culture, contrarianism, irony, maybe some genuine interest in the subculture, maybe anti wokeness, however you want to term that. It doesn't strike me as interesting enough to like really dig into that and find out what makes all of these individuals tick. I also don't view them as genuine enough to want to know their worldview. And I don't view them as an important enough part of the electorate to care about either. If there was like
Hmm.
a farmer there, I'd be like, let me hear you out. Let me get your perspective. But this is like a tiny, tiny fraction of a localized group that is whether you think they're growing in popularity or not, or they have some similarities to groups that are larger. The particular like downtown fascist right wing irony merchant doesn't necessarily strike me as someone that I care about how they got to that point.
Yeah, one one tether I thought of observing the same thing you did was I remember, you know, we have the privilege of hanging out with generations within the same room in New York, and I love it. So you go to a bar, and there might be some people who are like, I was a roadie for the Talking Heads, and talking to them was really cool. I was at the factory and all that. And I remember in the mid aughts, just talking about music, when music was as hotly debated as politics, they were so disappointed in me and our friend circle because they were like, you guys accept garbage pop music as actual music, and you guys cannot delineate between art and commerce, and you're just doing a thing. You're just being a contrarian. Pitchfork had turned at that point too into a popist kind of stance, where they were reviewing Christina Aguilera records with as much urgency as, I don't know, WI records, right? ARU weapons records. And fast forward to 2024, a loose kind of tether, be like, oh, these are the same versions of the Contrarians that we've known forever. Politics is just hotter than it has ever been, because we don't argue about art and music anymore.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because it's people who are part of a subculture adopting a non-subcultural bent in order to make them even more subcultural within the subculture.
Within the context, a certain context, right? Because you step out of downtown and you're in Murray Hill and everybody's kind of like, well, I'm kind of into Trump.
Well, right. It's like you can send those kids off to, Alabama, and like, this is amazing. Everyone's like me. And then like after 2 weeks, like, is this what we're doing? I'm just another guy in a red MAGA hat.
And skepticism is great, right? Like I love skeptics. I love contrarians. I think contrarians are how things get done, and things change for the better and worse, but they have to. But to your point, I guess what you're leading to is like, not only is it contextual, it's also along a thread. It's a timeline. It's an A-B through point. And as soon as you are contrarian enough and convince enough people to join and gate that you're opening for them, then there is more contrarianism to have happen. So all of a sudden, people who voted for a young black presidential nominee from Chicago are the mainstream, which is interesting.
Right. And this particular group that I'm referring to goes off and celebrates. They go down to the Sovereign House at some crypto party there. They're gleeful about this victory, like, we win. But that's also, again, part of the appeal is that you are celebrating in the hotbed of liberalism, of they them culture, of all these things that you have railed against, and you're the bad guy. Everyone likes being the bad guy at some point, or at least, especially everyone wants to be the edgelord.
God, when Peter Thiel took a slight interest to downtown New York, like, things started shifting, right? He started paying for stuff. He convinced certain influencers to like get on board. It's like, who's paying for this party? It's like, it's Peter Thiel. It's like, oh, that's fascinating, because he's not your prototypical conservative.
Right. I mean, also, I'm pretty sure that either the crypto company or Sovereign House, or some of that is his money.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
In a literal sense, yeah.
Yeah. No, quite literal. This is not hyperbole. I think he's invested in culture and like ownership of downtown content. But I was thinking about this in terms of like the things we talk about on this
Peter Thiel
pod.
is at Le Dive. Sorry.
I mean, it's beneath him, right? So he is older and not interested in like having, you'll see some fascist podcasters still holding down the corners of bars, but Peter Thiel is doing the easy thing where he's like so rich, and this is, the Facebook money and other investments and gross stuff. Well, maybe not gross stuff. That's debatable. Surveillance. But he has so much money where he could just be like, just throw a bunch of money downtown and see what we can do. He's not even that invested. He doesn't have to be that invested. He can just set up sovereign houses or fund certain projects on the low, or just have his influence and not really do that much.
Right. And I think you could compare this like the Medicis or something. It's like, all right, you can fund art or you can fund government. You just put money into things. Like for him, he's like, hey, I just basically built JD Vance, and now he's going to be vice president for a decrepit old man. Like JD Vance
30% chance he becomes president.
may very well become president, and he is a puppet for Peter Thiel. Not to say he doesn't have his own brain, but he is Peter Thiel's project. And now he controls Dime Square.
At least he doesn't control Chatham Square, which is we defend Chatham Square. Cookie's about to drop that AK-47 graphic.
Yeah, we got to talk Chatham Square. We got to still finish election talk, though. We got
First election talk.
I mean, I know you're chomping at the bit.
I want to talk about Chatham Square.
To defend Chatham Square. Now that Dime Square has fallen.
I was named after the gun, AK, and the wonderful basketball player from the Utah Jazz.
So election night, we've covered that. We know what happened, like in terms of the result. It was a bloodletting. The Kamala Harris campaign got smoked. We thought going in that there may be a delay before we'd find out the result. Lawyers, watching lawyers so they won't go broke, in the words of Notorious B.I.G., Dime Square's own. And but it ended very quickly. This was a wipeout.
He won.
We've heard a lot of speculation about what happened. How did this occur? And in my opinion, before we get deep into it, to lose to a demented carnival barker by this badly, like a lot has to go wrong. It's probably not just one specific thing. Like there's a lot of issues at play, which makes this conversation pretty panoramic. But let's break down, at least in our opinion, some of the stuff that went wrong with the Harris campaign. Like what do you think was like the biggest issue for her?
I don't think it deals with Harris that much. I don't think it's her campaign. I don't think it was his campaign. I don't think it was him per se. I think this was a cultural kind of shift that was based off of the internet, the way we talk about social media, and money. So I think the Dems could have thrown anyone up there and they would have gotten slaughtered. As we know now.
I mean, I feel like you need a little more, not going to say evidence. Evidence is not a criteria here on Cookies Hoops. I just mean, I hear this concept, but what does that mean?
Well, okay. I think it means that Kamala, there was criticism that we talked about on this pod about how her foreign policy may shift voters like yourself. Maybe, in my opinion, it was inflation, even though that was a global effect. It was easy to blame her. So that was her weakness, in my opinion. And then identity politics. People think liberals are insane and crazy, and the whole they them thing didn't work in her favor. Her being a woman of color also did not work in her favor. But I think the win was so apparent and easy, a 4-1 sweep, that I don't think the Democratic Party has to tear it down and rebuild, but I think they stand for something that is not currently in fashion, and it's really hard to fight against that. It was in fashion during Obama. Biden is kind of a trickier thing because it was a time of COVID. People were mailing in ballots. We kind of had lost our minds for a few years. But Trumpism is bigger than Trump himself as a man, because you saw this move globally towards a far right thing. And coming out of like major world wars that our grandparents and maybe even parents experienced, I think ideas ebb and flow, where you get people considering communism and fascism as viable points of view. And I think human brains kind of shift in unison. Maybe it has to do with microbiomes, maybe not. But I think the swath of contrarianism and investigation and scientific thought kind of lead pushes in one direction or another. Within America and this election, I think as the Biden presidency, we consider like asterisks, like the Lakers, Celtics, recent wins. They are wins, but they're complicated. I think this country is really annoyed at Democrats, liberal thinking, and the idea of a high-low in society where people who graduate from college think they know better than everyone else. Bernie Sanders claims that the weakness was the Democrats didn't talk enough to the everyday man. I don't know. I think they did. I just think looking at the results, I think, and polling was really bad here, which is even more fascinating. Looking at the results, I can't think of a single candidate, and this is a game we played on a previous Perfect Pod. I can't think of a single person aside from Adam Sandler in character as Billy Madison that could have gotten this done. No real politician could have beaten the idea of Trump, not Trump himself.
I mean, I agree with some of this, maybe not its intractability, but I mean, I agree that these are a lot of the realities. And where I differ is that I don't really view it as being a cultural swing as much as how the Democrats have purposely positioned themselves in a way that this is now how they're regarded, and then are dealing with the ramifications of their identity politics. And I think in the same way that the Republican Party has said, hey, look, we are the party for men. We are the party for white people. The Democratic Party has done the same and said, we're the party for women and we're the party for people of color. And of course, there's, back and forth between the two. But this idea that like the Democratic Party is welcoming to young males, for example, is just untrue. They aren't. And this is because of what they have emphasized. And this is where I think Bernie is correct on that. When Bernie was running for office, he was talking about healthcare. He was talking about education. He was talking about childcare. He was talking about things that everyone cares about. And he ran a lot of really effective ads where you would see Americans of all stripes talking about their real problems. Like, my daughter has cancer. I got fired and I've got arthritis. Like real stuff that was heartbreaking and in my opinion, cut across this political divide. And then Biden subsumed some of those progressive ideas or populist ideas that Bernie had pushed out there, in part, as you mentioned, because it was coming off the pandemic and that was already sort of what was occurring, even if we were doing it at a level far below other nations. There was at least a movement towards like, hey, we'll pay for your COVID tests. We'll mail them to you. You should take this time off from work. There was at least a groundswell, and in my opinion, because of both Bernie's campaign and some of the policies that were instituted during COVID that gave Biden a different feel from both Hillary and Harris. And I don't think it's because he's a man. I think it's because Hillary and Kamala were not offering those things. It was a celebration of who they were. It was a celebration of women. And I think that's what the Democratic Party has done. It's like, I'm with her. The future is female. Me Too movement.
Black Lives Matter. Defund the police.
But the Democratic Party did not embrace defund the police.
No, but it's part of the culture, right?
But that was the left. That was the left. I'm talking about the Democratic Party and the left are two different things. I'm talking about the system, the DNC. They went out and ran a cop. They went out and said, we're giving more money to police. Joe Biden loves cops. They went out and ran away from all that stuff. And I'm just saying, I think they created the same product that they ran with Hillary Clinton against the same opponent and got the same result.
I watched a clip of your boy Bernie Sanders kind of talking about exactly this. But he was like, what the Republicans do well is they divide up the Democrats. What the Democrats don't do well is they don't unify like the Republicans. And what he meant by that was like, listen, they're making you think of like a black Democratic voter, a left Democratic voter, the DNC, a woman Democratic voter, and all these subcategories you're talking about, I think, is gruel for conservatives this time. It's like, you guys are fighting among yourselves. Our message is, we hate you. Your message is, you hate yourself. And I think that really worked. I think it's simple. I think culturally, I think the country is like, fuck New York, fuck San Francisco, fuck LA.
Yeah.
We are college football, fuck the NBA. We just don't like you. And there were more voters who came out who said that than didn't.
But this is kind of not exactly what I'm saying, but in line with my opinion, is that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have both turned us into sports. Like, get your Realtree Harris hat, get your red MAGA hat, buy the merch, root for your squad, and they only offer you an emotional win. And I feel like in the case of the Democratic Party, Biden won in a landslide when they offered people stuff. And I think when we talk about, like, I mean, he literally did. And then he went out and didn't give it to people, and then they got hammered. I mean, Kamala offered people nothing. Hillary offered people nothing. And I just
think
feel like
Biden
if you were
was
going to...
the not Trump candidate. I don't think he ran because he was of sound policy. I think people were just fucking tired of Trump.
Oh, no doubt. Of course they were. But and Biden was not a good candidate, but he did at least bring some progressive policies into his campaign. I think he probably could have just said, I'm not Trump, and won. I think that's true. Yeah.
I mean, he was a corpse. Yeah. That's literally what he did.
But I mean,
Not literally,
to me, just the Democratic Party's biggest flaw has been saying, we will give you nothing, and using the Republican Party as a stick.
Why are we not respecting our opponent enough? Like, if the Knicks lose a game, obviously I'm criticizing the Knicks and their lack of bench, but what if the opponent's like a really good team?
I mean, I don't think Trump is a strong candidate at all. I think he has a strong personality.
So my argument is, it's not the candidate. It's the party. The party spoke, right? Because that was such an overwhelming victory that the minutia of the candidate themselves kind of lost. Like, they won everything. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is not about the things we know about Kamala Harris and Trump. What is really happening here? And I agree with you. I mean, we do a sports podcast, and I think the sports people have been the worst part of America for a while, in a funny way, myself included, for sure. But, like, Windhorse kind of alluded to this. It's like the way we talk on social media has formed our brain, right? And there's no long stories anymore. There's no provenance. There's no history. There's no points of view that kind of evolve. It's just like, here's a gotcha, TMZ, right? And I think messaging is important, but I think our brains have already shifted. And it's as simple and as this in my brain. It's, if you're given two types of people, and one type of person is like, I don't care about politics, but I'm going to vote for the person who knows what they're doing because stability is important to me. And another person who drowned the other person out is like, man, I want chaos. I want this to be fun. I don't want to do my homework. I want to watch the football game. I want to get drunk. I want to do drugs. Donald fucking Trump.
But, I think this is part of it. It's also that the Democrats have intentionally built their brand, in my opinion, in a way that was designed solely to counter the culture war of the Republican Party and say, great, we've created this split where they are the party of these people, we're the party of these people, they're the party of Donald Trump, we're the party of competency, they're the party of, of banning abortion, we're the party of reproductive rights. Like, they looked at it and like, great, this is perfect. And Trump is such a bad candidate and such a weak candidate that we don't have to do anything that our voters want.
But he was a contrarian first, right? Like, we're talking about through lines and contrarianism as the A to B. He was first the contrarian. He got up there being like, I got no ideas except the opposite of their ideas. That's his bag.
He says that, and I think that's part of his image. I also would say that he's a fairly traditional Republican in terms of in terms of the stuff that he does is pretty traditional.
Sure.
I mean,
tax cuts and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the same
Abortion.
stuff. Yeah. And some of those things are ones that he adopted when he became a Republican and now has leaned into. Other ones, he'll say stuff that is kind of antithetical to being a Republican at times. And then it seems like people say, oh, yeah, we don't do that. He's sort of expressed how there should be universal health care. And then, like, you never hear about it again because someone's like, oh, no, we're not doing that. He's like, oh, no, my bad.
But the genius of him is
a political novice at times, Sorry,
Yeah.
what were you saying?
Isn't the genius of the Conservative Party right now in the last 10 years is putting the burden of proof on Democrats? And Democrats always fall for it, right? It's just like, well, if you're so good, what's your solution? And they're like, these are our solutions. They're like, hate them. And that's their whole bag, right? Like, it's like, well, what's Trump going to do? He's like, tariffs. And they're like, well, tariffs aren't going to work. It's like, well, what's your plan? It's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And conservatives are sniping these points down one by one, just occupying time because you know how they're going to vote. I don't think the Democrats performed as poorly as it seems. I don't think they need to reinvent the wheel. I think they either need to change up the personnel a little bit and let like the tides of culture kind of shift with them, the rotation of the moon and the tides, and I think they're not surfing right now. And 4 years of Republicans who have all the power to do whatever they want, it's going to be extremely difficult. On one end, the optimist in me, if with my point of view baked in, thinks that they're going to kind of stutter because it's really hard to do things that please Americans. And they're going to have no excuse, no pushback. So Americans are going to be like, hey, my groceries are still expensive. It's like, well, yeah, because of inflation. Like you said you were going to solve this. On the other hand, my pessimist brain says, like, can he just appoint Barron as the Dunkmeister general for the next 20 years?
Right. I mean, I do think you're letting the Democratic Party off the hook.
But you're letting the conservatives off the hook.
What do you mean? The conservatives, I'm just saying, like, I think the conservatives do some things well. They're good at culture war. That's what they do. And that they've always done this. Mm-hmm. And they've been doing this for 30 years. I mean, this goes back to Richard Nixon and the Southern strategy. They've been doing culture war. They've been doing, the policies of grievance. This is their bag. I mean, I think immigration is a good
Democrats are the policy of grievance, for sure, right? The culture of grievance lies in the Democratic Party. I mean, as we're seeing now, people attacking themselves. I'm just like, shit, we're never going to figure this out.
No, I would not say that. I mean, I'm not even defending the Democratic Party. I would say that the main basis for Republican politics is grievance. I mean, you could say for all politics. I get that in a larger, broader sense. Yeah. But I would say it's like it's beef. It's like we have beef with China. We have beef with immigrants. We have beef with this. We have beef with trans. Right? We have beef with cities. So that's what I mean. Like, I just think moving forward, you could say, well, you could say, like, people on the left have beef with the world as it exists or the world as it was in the past. Like, this is all true. I mean, everyone has their vision. I just feel like, Trumpism is like regressive hostility, just kind of nutshell, But I guess one question I wanted to ask for you. People have said there was that clip of one of Kamala's supporters saying she ran the perfect campaign, she had the perfect pod, and yet she lost. She had Queen Latifah. Queen Latifah endorsed her, and she doesn't endorse anybody. And then she went to say, like, what it sounded like, her opinion, that America is just too sexist to elect a woman president. Andrew, is that true? Are we too sexist to have a broad president?
She did not run the perfect campaign, but I do think we're too sexist to have a woman president that like is up against the number one offense in the league. So it's tough because you have two examples like Hillary and Kamala, and Harris was the VP, so we like that. But like, I do think that was a hurdle that the Democratic Party knew of, and this person saying that is just an optimist. I appreciate that, but also a woman of color. They attacked her on that. Not to say that anything in this campaign mattered, but them attacking Obama and Harris relentlessly kind of had its effects, It is a systemically racist country. Not overtly, not maliciously, but like culturally, I think. There's people alive today, our heroes, who had parents who couldn't vote or grandparents who couldn't vote. But I think that statement is incorrect, but partially correct. It was not the perfect campaign, but I don't think America's ready for a woman because they're 0-4-2 against, to your point, the worst candidate in the history of politics.
I'm not sure about the sexism part. Not that America isn't sexist. Of course, America has a sexist problem. But if you look around the globe, it's like, are we more sexist than Italy?
Yes.
No, not a chance.
Yes.
Like, no.
I mean, Italians, woo, that one's a tough one. But like, the proof is there. It's like, are the Knicks better than the Celtics? No. I hate to say it. Not better than the Celtics.
I feel like this. I see your trick, but I'm not buying it.
You mean the results of elections?
Well, right. I mean, by pretty much every metric, we know that Italy is more sexist than the United States.
Wait,
we know
which metric?
We know.
Is it cultural vibe or
like
metric?
The Paisano meter?
It's,
like
right.
I'm saying it is.
Right.
Saying it is notoriously a country that still has like mother worshipping and this whole like virgin versus
like
the
feelings,
whore.
Man.
It's not feelings. It's well known. Italy has like a huge sexism
Everyone
problem.
knows, right?
No, it's what do you mean? It's what do you mean? It's everyone does know it. It's true. I mean,
but America
also,
has not. Right.
But
America's
what
not
I mean is,
right.
Well, I don't think we're the least sexist. I'm not making that argument, but I'm just saying if you look at countries, Argentina, Pakistan, whoever, there's a lot of countries out there that have had women presidents and we have not. So I don't think that the United States is so sexist that it cannot have a woman president. Also, if you look at like governors, I don't know, 20% of them are governors. Like, like Republicans, Kansas, Arkansas, North Dakota, Republican women, So to me, I just don't buy this idea. But say we do, if you could go back in time with this knowledge that you now have, you or a political operative who had the inner ear of the Harris campaign, would you go back in time and be like, guys, we cannot nominate her. She's a woman. We can't do it. And furthermore, we can't ever nominate a woman for president because they're just going to lose.
Well, that said, after Harris loses, but I said that like I kind of wanted the ghost of Joe Biden because he's an old white man. Bernie Sanders, I think policy gets destroyed in any popular election, but he's an old white man, so like maybe that works. And the other countries and senators being elected who are women, we have to talk about who comes out and votes for those and who comes out and votes for midterms and all that. It's a complicated discussion, but you got dudes on Twitter or X who are like, so liberals, tell me how the rights of women has been affected by the Supreme Court in the last word. Tell me specifically your life. And I'm like, oh, such a vibe, It's just like, it's mean, it's cruel to like our fellow humans, because like if someone was like, hey, you're not allowed to go to Philadelphia, and I'm like, well, I don't really go to Philadelphia, would I be cool with that? It's like, hey, you're not allowed uptown. It's like, well, I haven't been to uptown in months, and I can deal with not going uptown ever again. I'm like, but taking that right away from me, it's like deeply troubling.
No, I agree with that. This is not entirely tied to this specific conversation, but one thing that I had thought of that I feel like deserves to be mentioned about this idea of a woman president, a Democratic Party that has leaned in really hard on being the party of women as like an identity culture thing. And then I see in the aftermath of this demolition, people saying, look, we need to reach out to these young men and tell them that it's okay not to listen to these bad men on YouTube, and that you can be sensitive, you can be emotional, you can be vulnerable, you can be gay, you can be a Democrat. I'm like, this is the wrong tack. What are we doing here? You're just doubling down on the Democratic Party identity politics for women. And this may sound like I have a problem with the party being for women. I think it's great. I just feel like they've decided.
You sound like you think it's great.
Well, I'm saying I don't think any party should be for anyone. I think that political parties should offer a point of view on the world, and if that naturally dovetails with helping vulnerable populations or ones that have been oppressed or ones that have not had the amount of rights as other ones, the downtrodden, the poor, I'm all in favor of it. But to me, it should be about a worldview. It shouldn't be saying this is the party for this person or this person or that person. It's for an idea of making America a better place. And I thought about this, and we're talking about Bernie and Hillary and Kamala, and I realized...
Why are we talking about Bernie? Jesus.
The only man with the
he
longest
always
view in the
pops
room.
up. Yeah,
You brought him up, not me. I haven't even brought him up until now. You mentioned him. Or maybe I mentioned him. Probably right. But this point is not even specifically about Bernie. Is that when Hillary was the front runner with the backbone of the Democratic Party behind her against Obama, she brought this idea out of his sexist, abusive followers, and she called them Obama boys. This was the god, Hillary Clinton, the pioneer. Respect the architect. She's the one who first brought this idea out.
Wait, why is she the god? Because we all hated her from the jump.
I know. I'm saying, yes, I'm being facetious. I'm saying she brought out this idea that leftist dudes were sexist and that they were abusive. She brought that back. She rewound Selecta to use it again, but called it Bernie Bros. And she ran that against Bernie. And that got picked up by the media all over the place. Bernie's followers are sexist and abusive. The left, they hate women, they're neckbeards, they're so shitty. It got used again by Elizabeth Warren when she was doing the wet work for Joe Biden's campaign and did the exact same thing to accuse Bernie of being sexist and his followers the same way. I'm just saying, if you look at the landscape of the last 3 election cycles coming into this one and saying, what happened to the dudes? I'm like, what do you think happened to them? You accused them of being sexist 3 times in a row. You didn't
You're talking about Democrat dudes?
Yeah. Yes. I'm talking about in 3 consecutive primaries, the mainstream Democratic candidate or the supporter of the mainstream Democratic candidate used sexism as an accusation against the leftist candidate. They did it 3 times in a row.
I mean, I guess
That's
this
not
is my
nothing.
point. I guess
not
this is my
nothing.
point. Democrats arguing with other Democrats is like not going to work. If there's going to be any change, that has to get fixed because it's just like not a winning strategy. Maybe it's the candidate's fault, but like we shouldn't take the bait. The candidates, like in general, good political candidates just kind of like reverberate or mirror what people are talking about anyway. Donald Trump does not care about identity politics, but people are talking about it. And his whole vibe is like his next 4 years is going to be like, we can finally say Christmas again. You're welcome. It's like, well, we were doing this shit anyway, you know? It's like, he's such a good president. My eggs are $3. Like, they've been $3 the whole time. But I think Democrats, you know, I'm Twitter X pilled because I'm on that website begrudgingly, but at this point, but Democrats arguing about this stuff and the reemergence of like Bernie Sanders as like a talking point, who was like dethroned when he voted along party lines with Gaza. But like he's back again, as if it's a catch-all for like everything the Democratic Party is doing wrong. Like Bernie Sanders, I love him. He's one of the great Americans, but like, come on now, we got to leave that behind. It's like going to see the Rolling Stones at Giant Stadium. I get the appeal, but if we're gonna push forward, you know, I don't know what we're talking about, but to be able to drown out people arguing and blaming other people because everyone's correct about everything, I think. Like,
Well,
cynicism.
let me jump in there. I hear what you're saying. And I'm just saying Bernie gets brought up because he is the most prominent representative of an alternative to the neoliberal model. Because whether it's, you know, Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib or AOC, they are fringe characters. Bernie ran for president and got a ton of votes. He won like 17 states in a row against Hillary. He's old as dirt and he threw a lot of his credibility away. But that said, he gets brought up because he is the only high level, prominent, you know, famous person who represents that side of the Democratic spectrum.
But
And
isn't
the
he
thing
doing
is,
the? Go ahead. Sorry.
well, the only last thing I was going to say on about this exact specific idea is that the neoliberal viewpoint is what got shredded. So I understand
Can
why
you
people are
describe
turning to
neoliberal
Bernie.
to our listeners? What do you mean by neoliberal?
Well, neoliberal is essentially hypercentrism. It's
What do you mean
the
by
third.
hypercentrism? Like in plain English?
Well, what do you mean? I'm saying if you have
Can you?
the right, if you look at a political spectrum, and on one side you have far right, and that would be the contemporary Republican Party, and on one side you would have, say, like the far left, which would be in America maybe Bernie, but really the far left would be way further than Bernie, but America is just typically more conservative than other places. But the middle would be Hillary Clinton. It would be Kamala Harris. It would be Bill Clinton. Barack Obama would be in that part as well. It's people who want to keep the status quo as it is. They want to preserve the system. Every now and then they'll throw a bone towards, you know, people who are more progressive. But generally speaking, they don't want to change anything. And they want to keep it so that the same wealthy corporate powers are in the same positions. That they don't want to upend the apple cart. And I would say that Kamala Harris probably ran the most right-wing campaign of any Democrat in history, at least post-Civil War or something along those lines. I mean, it was her being associated with like trans rights is hilarious because, yeah, she signed something, and you know that's a sticking point with conservatives. But as far as her policies, she was pro-cop, pro-war, anti-immigration, pro-genocide, like anti-freedom of speech. I mean, she just ran as a right-wing candidate. And that's all I'm saying. When I'm saying, I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt by calling her a centrist. She wasn't. She was a Republican.
I think voters in New York and LA and San Francisco would agree. I just think this kind of result, abandons this kind of train of thought for me. I think this is what America is right now in 2024. And I like the people, and I say when everyone's right, I don't mean that facetiously. I think every opinion I hear is kind of like true. Your opinions are true. The things I'm reading on Twitter are true. And I think the country is here. And I don't think Kamala Harris's campaign really could push against that based off of the results of the election. And I can live with the idea that this is Ben Diedrich's America, and I am just a part of it.
A great
Wait,
land.
do you think it was stolen?
No.
That's the most interesting thing. If any election is stolen, I want to know about it. Starlink, Elon Musk, 15 million alleged votes for Harris disappeared from down ballot Democratic voters. Like, what happened?
Wait, tell me about the 15 million thing.
It's being debated about the actual number, but it's a discrepancy between Democrats who voted for Biden that didn't vote for Harris this time.
Oh, weird. What could that be? I mean, we haven't even talked about
but it's
but
not
I'm saying
policy.
it is that. No. I mean, we know what it is. And
Starlink?
in the run up, no, it's obviously Gaza, and we know it is.
No,
And
it's not. No, it's not.
It-
Foreign
it-
policy
it-
does
without-
not matter to people.
No,
like
it
that.
is without question. And it's not even.
What, can you
debatable.
prove it?
Yes.
Can you prove it? How?
Yes. In the run up to the election, it was obvious that Kamala's refusal to break with Biden's Gaza policy was a huge problem that was being wildly underdiscussed, underreported. When you looked at the few polls that were out there, 80% of
Polling was
Democrats.
terrible.
Wait,
Polling was
and I
terrible.
agree, and I think there was a reason for that because those were really inconvenient numbers. 80% of Democrats disapproved of her policy. If that was well known, it would have created a huge firestorm. How are you going against 80% of your voters? People didn't talk about it. Then you go back and you look at the uncommitted movement, right? New York State primary. It was Joe Biden against no one. Marianne Williamson threw her ass back on the ballot just for a second. 12% left it blank while showing up at the polls. Another 7% in New York State. In New York State. Voted for Williamson and just another random person. That was 20% of the people who showed up at the primaries did it in a way that made it clear they were not going to vote for Joe Biden. What I'm saying is, if you look at that percentage of people in New York State, 1 out of 5 voters were unhappy with Joe Biden. If you look at 80% of Democratic voters were unhappy with the Gaza policy as Kamala Harris did it, we know where those votes went. I look at my social circle. This is the first time in my life I haven't voted for a presidential candidate. And it's not me. I would say a third of my friends, just not with, I'm saying this is anecdotal. But
yeah, dude,
I know
downtown New York, come on.
But we're saying, how did those votes disappear? I'm just saying, this is how it disappeared. We had a year-long movement of no votes for genocide. We had a year-long of people pushing, the uncommitted idea. It's and even beyond that, if you look at the people who should have been on the front lines for Harris, the people running GOTV, the people out there canvassing, the people doing phone banking, the people who were singing her praises and telling people how it was important to get out and vote. Instead, they're getting arrested on campus. They're running, parades across the bridge. They're interrupting Harris's speeches. And they're running campaigns, especially on social media, saying, don't vote for genocide. No votes for genocide. To me, the idea that it was fracking or just a lack of enthusiasm, man, this is just this is covering up. They're trying to push it under the rug. It was Gaza. It's 100% Gaza. The numbers make it clear. It's obvious.
I want to interrupt just before you go on because this alleged, I kind of
No, that was it.
led you down the wrong path because the level-headed people in politics are like, there is no 15 million discrepancy. It's accounted for through like mail-in ballots that are still being counted. It's closer to like even as it was last time. So there was the 15 million has caught fire. That's why I kept on saying allegedly, because there is maybe no.
I don't care
15
about.
million.
I don't care about that thing. I don't even know about the 15. I'm just saying, it is so apparent that Gaza was crippling, and no one wants to talk about it for obvious reasons. It's inconvenient, and like nothing has changed. But it is completely obvious that it destroyed her campaign in the same way that Obama ran to victory on unhappiness with the Iraq War. And it's just not being discussed.
I think what we're learning from these Trump is like, for sure, I think Gaza is one of the foremost topics in the world. Heartbreaking, evil, disastrous, right? Humanity should not act this way, and humanity's job is to prevent it. That said, the Trump era in politics is like, oh, this stuff doesn't matter. Like, what people are voting for is like, can we just stop spending money in foreign places because I can't pay my bills? It's like, why can't you pay your bills? It's like, well, like everything's expensive and I'm not getting a raise. Like, that's why the conservatives have such a strong voice. It's like, I don't think swing state voters are thinking like the alliance to other countries is forming an ethical, fraught environment in the world where mass atrocities are occurring. I think they're just like, I need more money.
I think there is truth to that. I do not vilify most people who vote for Trump. I think they're.
Yeah, no. I have friends who vote
I don't think they're. I don't think most of them are terrible racists. I don't think most of them are terrible sexist, and that is acknowledging that those
they talk about that, right?
But I'm saying
they're like, stop calling me racist.
But those kind of people are of course among their ranks. I'm not. They are the party for those general.
I've cast a check from Gavin McInnes and Vice. Yes,
but what I'm saying is, I think America has a 30% adult population that reads at a fourth grade level. I think we have a relatively low information, electorate. There was a Google, spike on the day of the election that was like, is Joe Biden still running?
Yep, that was
most
hilarious.
people just don't know what's going on. And I'm with you. I think a lot of the people who are being accused of being, horrible sexists and racists who want to make this country fascist did vote as like, I don't know, he says he wants eggs to be cheaper. I'm hearing a lot of stuff. I'm hearing a lot of noise. I'm not really paying attention. But this brings me back to why I think Gaza was sandbagged Harris and was going to sandbag Biden, was that those are active, informed people. They are the young legs. They're your boots on the ground. And they all would have voted for Biden or Harris, and they all did not. Like, they just turned off that enthusiasm switch, and those voters just abandoned her. And I'm not saying this changes everything, but I also believe there was a trickle down with that, whether it's enthusiasm. You would see a celebrity endorse Kamala Harris. You go on their Instagram page and it's baby murderer, baby murderer, baby murderer. It was a huge liability.
I don't think that stuff matters. I mean, obviously we know those are
then you're
trolls.
just saying that but then we're just saying that like nothing matters, right? Because like,
well,
if we're going to say that young people, everyone
we need to figure out
campus,
new things that matter, right?
I'm saying every young person on campus who considers themselves a Democrat saw their peers being like thrown on the ground and stomped on by police officers.
But people hate Ivy League culture anyway, and I thought what happened in Columbia was an atrocity for sure. That shouldn't have happened. Schools are kind of in the service industry, but like, that's a cultural thing. I don't think the actual misbehavior of Columbia University impacted swing state voters in counties that went to Biden before. We talk about the Latin vote skyrocketed. Stand-up comedy wins this one for now. And the statistics are vague, but like, and I do agree that the Democratic Party lost votes because of their policy on Gaza. They were stuck between their mouths and what they wanted, and it was really impossible for them to wiggle out of that. And now Trump is going to have a worse policy with Gaza, ironically, but that's not why Democrats were mad at Democrats. But I think, to me, just seeing the result and all the swing states going and which counties went to conservatives and the GOP, I'm like, man, I think this is one of those cases where I would benefit from keeping it simple. It's like, it is a cultural war. It is a ethical world debate. It is about progress or the resistance against progress. But mostly it was about inflation and people being like, I am having trouble living my life.
Yeah, those are all components of it. The last thing I was thinking on the Gaza topic was just that it wasn't talked about, but those internal numbers were discussed and pivotal because of the way that both campaigns switched late, right? Apparently, according to one leak, the Trump campaign, realized that people who viewed Gaza as important in swing states were 6 times more likely to switch. That's huge. And then Trump went out there. He met with Muslim leaders in Michigan. He said, Kamala's out here with Dick Cheney's daughter, the woman who destroyed the Middle East. She's hanging out with warmongers. She was in my cabinet. All she wanted to do was go to war in the Middle East with Iran, with Iraq. Trump went out there, and even if it's not genuine, even if it's purely for strategic or Machiavellian purposes, went out there and presented Kamala Harris as a warmonger. And that was effective. And he won those communities in places where the Democratic Muslim women who were running destroyed their competition, and yet Trump won. And I think you could also look at this and say the mysterious rightward swing for Kamala Harris was also based on this, where they probably looked at their internals and said, we are ruined because of Gaza. The left is out. Young people are out. We have no support. We have no enthusiasm. We only have one way of winning this election, and it's to pivot incredibly hard to the right. And we're going to go anti-immigration. We're going to bring out Liz Cheney. We're just going to run as the real Republican. And that was what dictated their late strategy, in my opinion. I don't know this, but I just mean they both made late moves that made it pretty clear that this was a population that could help swing this election. That's all I mean.
I mean, in my personal world, hell, I'm like, Mikal Bridges costs way too much for the Knicks for what he provides. I get he's a positive player. They sent way too much, and it affects their present and future. And my friend who went to a bunch of playoff games last year was like, who's Mikal Bridges? Are they going to be in the playoffs again? Because I want to go. That was awesome. Like Brunson, who's on their team now? I'm like, this guy named Karl Anthony Towns. They're like, is he good? Can I go to a finals game? And I think it was a bit of a hand slap this election for people who who pay attention to details. And you can call it like, I kind of think about statistics in the way like the last 20 years have gone, and like Revenge of the Nerds, Fall of the Nerd, Return of the Nerd, all these things. But we saw it kind of with COVID and science. And it's a really hard thing to talk about because science is kind of, science barters in failure, right? So Fauci might be like, hey, you had to do this thing, but then more, and you have to do a new thing. Then we found out even more. You got to go back, and maybe I got it wrong, but are you alive? And people are like, why didn't you just tell me to do this thing right off the bat? It's like, well, we didn't have the information. We weren't sure if wearing masks did or didn't matter. But at that point, we wanted to keep you alive to take the next series of orders and kick the can down the road. And people are like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of vaccines. I'm tired of I just want to go back and eat small bears and have the worm devour my brains like a normal person. I don't want to listen to these nerds telling me what to do anymore. We can like dissect. We can do the autopsy or the postmortem on this campaign, but I walk away with the feeling being like we're not seeing the big picture. I'm not seeing the big picture. My bad.
To me, my post Malone of this is that I view it really as a rebuke of
course
liberalism. Of course I do, but that's because I'm right. And how would I believe
hey, this is your
something
country.
else?
You are right. You won.
Well, I just mean, how else would you interpret this? You know, to me, as someone who said the Democrats, whenever they go super like neoliberal, they put themselves into a tough situation to win. And
Doesn't neoliberal change with every campaign?
No, it's always the same.
Wait, but yeah, no, it's not, because like
no, neoliberals
society
are
changes
neoliberals.
and okay, describe what a neoliberal is again. I wasn't sure when you did it the first time, but can you talk about that?
I mean, I don't have like the exact definition at hand, but I mean, a neoliberal is someone who is intensely status quo, not status Andrew quo, but status quo, who is pro-business, pro the war machine, pro all of basically the same things as Republicans, who also uses these societal wedges of culture war to stay on the other side as the Republicans. They essentially believe all the same stuff, except they use race, not class. They use race, religion, women's rights, and those are the ways that they gather their people. And this is exactly what we saw.
Right.
But what I mean is, those stakes are real. You know, abortion rights, that's a real stake. People being deported, that's one thing. Those are real stakes. I'm not disputing that in the least. But I'm saying they are artificial stakes. They are ones that are created by class war. They are not ones that the neoliberal gets affected by, because ultimately is a party of the elites. And I think this was a rebuke to that, because to the point you made about Donald Trump and people around the country disliking, you know, what they stood for. And we made fun of it, or other people made fun of it, or whoever. But Donald Trump is out there stumping around. He's doing barnstorming tours in front of a handful of sweaty yokels, and he's out there rambling for 2 hours at a time, saying nothing. Meanwhile,
doesn't matter.
Harris
is
over.
He wants.
He's doing the work, is what it is. And then you got Harris, who's over here. Beyonce, star-studded event, $1 billion
right?
going to your campaign. I'm with you. I'm saying someone looks at it and it's like, fuck this. She's not offering me anything. She's in some castle somewhere. Who is she? She was the vice president who went nowhere, who ran a bullshit campaign, who's offering me nothing. And she's out there with Beyonce and a bunch of superstars and Taylor Swift. I'm going to vote for this guy who's bumbling around in my backyard, eating cat food, yelling about sharks and windmills.
See, I even think it's farther than that. I think when someone says, fuck this, it's to the whole thing. It's to Trump rallies, to Kamala Harris rallies. They say, fuck this. Can just the price of my living get better?
I think that's part of it. Again, I think
that low in, right?
No, I think that's part of it. And I also, the takeaways, right? That you see like from some Democrats who obviously believe she ran a perfect campaign, except it wasn't mean to trans people enough. Like if it was a little bit more mean to trans,
you can't listen to those people though. You can't let those people in.
No, of course you can. I'm just saying, to me, like when people are breaking it down, I'm like, oh, here's what we got. I saw some Ezra Klein thing, and it was coached in this like empathetic, mealy-mouthed tone. And then eventually you get to his real point, which was like, Kamala Harris only did the right thing when she got racist about the border. I was like, you wrote this whole thing talking about we need to understand like young white people better, and we need to outreach to this forgotten part of the population. And how do we do that? By being more racist. because they like racism. I'm like, I disagree. I just don't believe that to be true. I don't think the way to get young white voters is to be more racist. That's just me, though.
Okay.
Well, all we've figured out is that I've been right for ages about this, and the rest of America's just going to have to catch up. But yeah, so we're looking forward to a fun new 4 years, and I want people to know it's not going to change the perfection of the pods. We adapt with the times, Andrew.
In fact, that was the perfect political pod. 1 hour of straight flames.
That was the re-electionables portion of the pod. Now let's talk about some round ball. First thing that needs to be addressed. We're talking poll numbers. We're talking stats, percentages. 2 teams in the Eastern Conference currently possess winning records. Thoughts?
I mean, as I got to defend my East, but it's hard, right? Because the Cavaliers are fucking good. That team is like high octane. Garland looks healthy. So like shout out to them mowing down other teams, and like the disparity between the top 2 teams in the East and the bottom, like they're feasting on the bottom teams. But yeah, so far injury, the Sixers, your Sixers, you were right about the election, and it's tough to take that L for Pennsylvania over and over, but the Sixers are not doing their job. I expected them to have a winning record, but it's not their fault. Their stars are out. There's not much parity in the East, but it's not the East's fault. It's injury and health, the good health of the Cavaliers.
And then there's the Bucks.
Well, that they're dealing with a spiritual opponent there. He has a black shroud. He has a stethoscope. He has a Sith. He is Doc Rivers. Scythe, the Grim Reaper of cultural basketball and political campaigns.
Yeah, the Dems brought him in late.
What were they doing? They know how this goes.
All right, give us that quick fourth quarter kiss of death. Okay, Doc is here. Should we make a judgment? Should we make adjustments?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. You're good.
I looked at the wording of that tweet again from Doug Emhoff, and it was like the legendary Doc Rivers. I'm like, ooh, well, how is he legendary? That's the question. Legendary,
right.
Good?
Doc, we're up 3-1. How do we bring this thing home?
You got to go with the tried and true people who got you here. You need to forget about all the people under the age of 28, 29. Just don't listen to them. I mean, and we roll with it.
It's crazy. It's amazing what he did. Like, I just can't get away from these Doc Rivers Harris combinations. Try as I might.
What are you seeing in the East that no one else is?
Well,
I know
let's talk Sixers real quick, because I want to get into the Knicks. We talked about the Bucks before, but the Sixers are interesting because with Embiid out and then Paul George getting hurt, they struggle out of the gate, and it was all sort of like, well, yeah, this sucks. You know, you can't get these games back later, but you're just going to have to deal with it. And then Maxey gets hurt. Paul George has been okay as a playmaker and a guy who can create his own shot. He's excellent. Hasn't shot well. He's made 2 kind of boneheaded plays with the game in the line in a couple of games when he's been back. One, he took a 2 when he meant to take a 3 because he didn't know the score. And then last night's barn burner, instant classic against the Charlotte Hornets. He had a lane to the basket and he pulled back, and then a second defender came when he chucked up an errant long 2, and the game ended. I'm not holding all that against him. I like Paul George. He's good. But yesterday's win was really necessary, because had that not occurred, if you look at their schedule coming up and their wave of defeats in the past, they easily could have caught like a 10 to 13 game losing streak.
Mm-hmm.
And if that had happened, I really do wonder what sort of evaluations would have happened. Would people have said, we're 1-13, knowing that there is a play-in scenario where you don't have to be good to make the play-in? Like, we might be able to make it to being a 10-game under 500 team.
Sure. Yeah.
Also, considering how bad the East has been. If 6 teams were off to these great starts and you were in this insane hole, it'd be one thing, but you're looking at the landscape and you're like, well, we're only like 3 games back right now. So I don't know what their calculus is. Like, at what point, if you're 2-16 and you're Philadelphia and Embiid isn't back yet and Maxi's about to come back from injury, are you giving up the ghost?
This is so tough, right? Because it's the blessing and curse of Joel Embiid, who is not far removed from his MVP caliber type performances, even as recently as this time last year. But his body's broken. He's going to come back on Tuesday. Hopefully, finally, justice was doled out, and he had to serve his 3-game suspension that the NBA threw down. But this team is better than their record. Paul George is a good player. Joel Embiid is obviously a wonderful player if he's halfway healthy. Tyrese Maxey can do his thing. And I want to blame the players in the margins, but like, they're good enough players too. I would have liked to seen maybe some more youth there, more a higher upside perhaps, but they're at the victims of their candidate, right? Like, what can they do?
Yeah, I mean, right. Ultimately, if you build a team this lopsided and you're missing 2 of those 3 for the first, 10, 12 games, you're up shit creek. Like, that's just the reality. I don't necessarily like the way this team is constructed. Part of it is because a lot of them are very boring.
Yeah, they're not fun.
They're just not entertaining players. But part of it is that you could make an argument they are better constructed to operate around Joe and around Maxey and around Paul George, but I'm not sure that that's true, because most of these guys aren't great defenders. Most of these guys aren't really good shooters, and that would be the sort of complementary part that you would want. You want shooting, you want defense, and you want high IQ players that move the ball, and that's just not who they have. One upside I would say, though, is that at least guys like Yabusele and McCain look like they can contribute. And I don't think it's a coincidence that those are the non-retread guys who are in this mix. Lowry's been pretty good, too. He deserves credit. I mean, he's long in the tooth. He's a dwarf, but he actually has been playing really well.
He's got junk in the trunk.
Yeah.
But McCain is... I love McCain, the basketball player. I
love McCain, the politician.
Yeah. There's one McCain I really love. It's that warmongering politician. Rest in peace. But like, they drafted McCain. I don't like the one and done bus factory, but he is a bright spot because I don't think Maxey's a true point guard. Maxey was going off, but he was scoring, not at the highest efficiency. It is too early to do anything. The Sixers just have to wait, right? Because you can't even make moves. I mean, you can always make smart moves by maybe shedding an old player for like a player who can add a dynamicism to offensive or defensive possessions. But like, you got to wait to see what kind of Joel Embiid is going to show up this season. You got to wait and see if Paul George can like wake up. He's like sleepwalking out there, to your point. And then everything else is exactly what you thought it was going to be. So, like, those 2 players are their superstars, and either they start acting like it, or you make a move. But you don't know it.
Well, I've always believed this version of Philly was not the one that we're going to see later in the season.
I agree.
To me, they always were going to make a trade for a forward, maybe a trade for a larger guard or a wing who can handle the ball. I don't know who these players are. I'm saying in this hypothetical world where they brought back Oubre and then signed
Eric Gordon.
you know, some of these guys like Drummond, where you're just going to package their contracts together at some point.
And you wait for these bad teams with 3 centers to kind of call it, right? Like I'm looking at the Trailblazers. I don't think you want Time Lord because of his risk, but he's going to be available. I don't think you want Ayton, but he's going to be available soon. Stuff like that. You got to wait for other teams to kind of give up in order to make that move because everyone has that Harris Waltz optimism right now.
I mean, one thing, I think this is more or less what you were saying, is that despite their horrific start, they're bad on offense, they're bad on defense, none of this makes sense. You just got to plow through it, eat these L's, and then say, all right, Embiid is back, Paul George is back, Maxey is here. At least we now know that McCain and Yabusele are playable. Mm-hmm. Maybe we got to stick both Oubre and Martin on the bench because they both stink.
Nice bench players. I enjoy them in that role.
I'm willing to give someone like Martin, the benefit of the doubt because he's shot really poorly. But the main thing is that neither of these guys were good shooters to start with, and that was what I meant about complementary players. Like, I mean, Martin and Oubre are both kind of bad 3-point shooters. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're complementary. And when you stick them out there as starters with Andre Drummond, you just don't have enough shooting. I mean, the Sixers are the worst shooting team in the league. Their offense is putrid when those guys are out there with Drummond. I looked at some of the lineup data. It's like 0th percentile when those 3 guys are on the court. Like, they just have to stop doing it. And I'm not knocking Nick Nurse for trying to see what works this early in the season, but you got to stop, dude. You actually can't keep running those 3 players out together.
He's damned if he do, damned if he plays any one of these guys. They got by injuries. Like it's hard to analyze a team with this lineup. Like when your top 2 dogs are out and one of them is an MVP and the other one was your big free agent acquisition, so you've never actually even seen them play together. It sucks, but like you just kind of have to wait and then see 20 games of them and then decide what to do.
My main take is that Drummond should not be on the floor. Stop playing him. He can't play, and it's unserious. I turn on the TV and I see Andre Drummond on the court. I'm like, this is not a real game. You are not actually requiring me to watch this. Last night, the game against the Hornets, really entertaining. And, I love watching LaMelo. He's awesome.
Yeah.
Every time Drummond would come on, I would turn the channel. Like, I have some pride, man. You can't make me watch a basketball game with Andre Drummond on the court in 2024. I will not do it. Like, that is my red line, Andrew.
Step into my Taj Gibson pain, man. I was like, all right.
He was out there.
He's starting, right?
Yeah, Eric Gordon crashed into him. I'm like, get the fuck off my screen. Eric Gordon and Taj Gibson collapsing in a pile of aged limbs? No, not watching it.
This is like, can you think of other players in history when you thought, like shout out to players, the joy of basketball, celebrating these athletes. Like
Love
to
players.
get to Othella Harrington's point in your life is like you've won life. But when I see him in a Knicks uniform playing ball, I'm just like, this ain't serious. Like I can do something else. I just have to know that this is a farce. This is poking fun at the thing I love so dearly.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. Andre Drummond is a human wink.
Yeah. Is he a Hall of Famer?
No. You turn on the TV and you turn on the TV and it's like there's Drummond. It's like ding. You don't have to watch.
I mean,
this is all a joke. Don't worry about it. We're just going through the motions out here. No one's serious.
I mean, I think that way about the Lakers, Malone, Nash, Dwight Howard era. I was like, this ain't serious. Like, they're not gonna win. Like, what are we doing? Are we just like putting up our candidates and just being like, you'll figure it out, vote for us? But like, there's certain players in the NBA currently, and I don't want to just be like they're old players. For a while, Cam Thomas was that guy being like, oh, this is a joke. This guy's just drop 30 and lose by 30. The worm's kind of turned on him too, right? That brain-eating worm.
Yeah, I agree. Cam's played well, and
he's nice.
As I realized it last year when I was at a couple Nets games, I'm like, this guy's kind of enthralling as a bucket because the shot's just going up, and he's a little dude, and he's good at making really hard shots, but there's an insistency to the way that he plays that I'm not comparing it to Kobe because like I haven't seen Kobe play live or anything, but this thing of the ball's in his hands and now he's going to proceed. I did, but it wasn't good seats. I saw him from, I think I saw him once or twice, but from like a box. I never saw like courtside. But Cam's ability to just, here's the ball, dude. He's like, all right, cool. A shot's going up and it might go in. And I agree. He went from being this comical chucker to like a fairly valuable offensive player. He can't do much else, but pretty good. I'm trying to think of other examples of this model. Like Taj is definitely one. Derrick Rose was a little bit like that.
Yeah.
Late career Derrick Rose, but he was more of an innings eater or like a spiritual guru for teams who are looking for a wise, I'm not sure that's the right word, but looking for an elder statesman.
I mean, there's different versions of this, right? Tobias Harris comes to mind. He wasn't always this way, but now if you see him in a game, you're just like, this doesn't matter. They're not playing to win this game. They're playing because they have to put players on the court. And he's a starter level player in the NBA. A Jordan Poole, for example. Yeah. Jordan Poole, like, was he a top 5 player in the first few weeks? Perhaps. Do you turn on a game and you're like, hey, if you're not going to take this seriously, I'm not going to take this seriously?
I kind of like the Wizards.
Can we talk about the Wizards? Because Bilal Coulibaly is awesome. And that team, I know I love Sarr. You know I love Sarr. But, like, I think we talked about it a little last week, not to repeat myself, but things can get interesting if you just do interesting things. It doesn't have to take long.
That's a good point, because I feel like even last year, looked at the Wizards and was like, what's the plan here?
Yeah.
They're so far away from, figuring this out. And now you see like Bob Carrington.
Exciting.
Looks pretty good. What's his name? Is it Keandre? I'm forgetting. It's
George. Yeah. Keontae George. Is it Keontae? Is it?
Well, there.
Is it Silence of the Lambs?
No, but there is the Keontae George.
Oh, right. My Kaishawn George? Is that who you're talking about?
It might be Kaishawn. It's KY. Yeah. KY with the jelly, George.
Damn.
But I'm saying he looks good. And then Sarr, he doesn't do a lot of things, but he goes out and tries to swat every shot that's around him. I like what they're doing. I mean, they have some natural cluelessness from playing that many young guys. I think they're fun.
Yeah.
And
obviously,
go ahead. Sorry.
And it's not easy to get a top draft pick to take Sarr. I'm not saying like you can just do interesting things and get interesting, but like sometimes being like, hey, we're not going to trade away our top picks that we earned for being so bad for a veteran, a proven veteran. We're not going to get Paul George in here to just die on the vine, which they've done before. We're going to use these picks on the best player available, whether that be Wemby's running mate or a true unknown with a low but a high ceiling in Sarr. I'm like, I'm down for this. Sometimes doing nothing is the most interesting thing you can do.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a really, really bad Wizards team. I'm not arguing otherwise. I'm saying
they're 2-6,
and they suck. But
they can get good
bad,
soon. Yeah.
But being bad and having an interesting product are two different things.
I agree. Like, are you tuning in to watch the Atlanta Hawks?
A little bit,
Yeah, they're
because
kind of fun, right?
the Hawks and the Wizards are kind of doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get a whole bunch of really athletic 6'8", 6'9" guys and have them run around.
Just deflect balls. Every time you see a pass or a shot, just try to get your fingertips on it.
Like, we're
Dyson
going to be good, right?
Daniels, dude.
We're going to be
Yeah.
good? Well, not really, but that's sort of besides the point. We're building an idea, a
Off the 4 and
futuristic,
7. Yeah.
modern basketball team.
I mean, the Hawks. I'm more of a DeJounte Murray apologist than you are, but the early returns on that trade. Obviously, he's been injured. Bringing Dyson Daniels over from New Orleans, who everyone liked. You know, we're not alone in liking Dyson Daniels. I did not know he was 2 players in one, 2 defenders in one.
You get Dyson and Daniels. They're both
It's
out there.
crazy. What does he have? 17 steals in the last 3 games before tonight.
Yeah.
That's
They were,
insane.
I looked up the hustle stats
Yeah.
for the NBA, and Jokic had a lot. He's out there getting handsy,
I love Jokic.
but I forget exactly where the cutoff was. But Daniels had more than twice of like number 4 or 5 and below on the list.
They're not
just
cheap either.
Outrageous.
He's in people's pockets. Like, they're not just steals that fall into like the hands of the player, the secondary player, as the first guy does the work. He's a primary defender on wing guys, and he's everywhere. He's long. He's cutting off angles. He's anticipating cuts, and he's getting his hands on that rock. Cookies.
Yeah, he looks fantastic. I mean,
A rock.
excluding all the draft picks, right? You know, that they added in order to get Murray. There was at least a couple that the Hawks got in that deal.
Mm-hmm.
Would you do Murray for Daniels straight up?
Yeah, absolutely, especially with their salary cap hits. But just in a bubble as a player, yeah, I have recency bias. I have all the biases, but like, I think Dyson Daniels right now is a top 50 player.
You know, he still can't really shoot.
No,
I mean, that's a problem. His
Don't care.
efficiency is really low. I'm just
He's
bringing
not
up
perfect.
the arguments against him. But
He doesn't block
yeah,
shots, whatever.
I also think he's 21 years old.
Yeah,
You know, if you can get him, he blocks a shot a game, which is pretty decent. You know, like I'm saying, he's still doing something over there. I just like players like that. I like Matisse Thybulle. I like Dunn, who's now looks really good with the Clippers.
Duns.
I like Daniels.
Yeah.
I think guys who have uniquely disruptive defensive skills are insanely valuable, and those players are sick.
Well, like in his most powerful form, Ben Simmons, just as a defender, could dominate from foul line to foul line in between, right? Not including his passing or his effective shooting, all that stuff. Dyson Daniels is that. Ben Simmons was an all NBA player. Dyson Daniels is not that. But he is a player who can dominate on defense on half the court. And that's just awesome. You know, like I think that's worth more than a DeJounte Murray at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Caruso, really good at that too. To me, the biggest thing is that teams have gotten so good at isolating the defender they want on the offensive player they want, that these guys who are great in transition, guys who are great help, guys who get in passing lanes, you know, like Dyson Daniels, who get these deflections, like they really change the dynamic of the defense. Also, if you look at the players who generate the most valuable possessions, right? Whether that's like James Harden's ability to get to the foul line on a 3, like that is just a uniquely valuable. That is more valuable than like Steph Curry taking a wide open shot, just mathematically, like a James Harden drawing a foul on the 3-point line. That's worth 2.5 points. That's insane.
Right.
So defensively, the one thing you do not want to surrender are live ball turnovers. They're the absolute worst. Dead ball turnover, it's bad, but it's ultimately better than a missed shot, if that makes sense.
Sure.
like-
Yeah, I hear that.
The ball stops, okay, you get your defense back. A missed shot, they can run off of it. Can't run off a dead ball turnover. But a live ball turnover, they're the worst. And that's what Dyson Daniels generates. Like, doink, all right, the ball's loose. Everyone's running around. Now it goes on the court, and now he dunks it.
Yeah.
It's like it leads to transition opportunities. It leads to good offense. And those are the kind of players that, like, OKC is putting all over the court.
I kind of wanted, I agree with all that. And I kind of wanted to talk about like the glitch in the NBA matrix, right? Occasionally there's a player that puts up some statistics that you're like, wait, this is surreal. This doesn't really coincide with my grasp of reality because, you know, traditionally, if you stole a couple of passes a game, incredible. You're in the top of the league, you know, if you average 2 or 3 of those. And he put up a 3-game run where it's just like, is our perception limiting our practice? What if players can steal 5 balls a game? What if Wemby can block 7 shots a game? What if you can go to the line 20 times? Like, I love players like this who kind of like reshape. Steph Curry, you mentioned Steph Curry. He did this in the most fun way because it was an offensive assault with 3-pointers. It's like, what if we just had this player take as many 3-pointers as he could to the point where if they were double teaming him out there, he'd just go in for a layup or pass it off. Like changing the dynamics of a game, like what Dyson Daniels is doing now, I was like, really exciting. I'm into it, man. And I think there's potential for a few players in the league currently to do that.
Right. The question is it replicable because they're being used a certain way? Is it replicable because you can find people who have that skill set and then now know how to deploy them? Or is it non-replicable because he's a fucking freak? And
dude, Mike D'Antoni,
Curry,
Quentin Richardson, right?
And Curry kind of fits all of these, right? Just historically speaking, it's like, hey, yes, you can totally start pulling deep threes off a step back when they set a screen for you 30 feet from the basket. Right. You can do that. Okay, we're going to start doing it. Great. Yeah. You can start pulling threes in transition instead of driving to the basket. Great. Okay, we're doing it. You can pull from the logo. Go from the logo. Shoot from wherever, man. It's cool. Yeah. Go ahead. You can do it. But you can't do it like him.
I know. It's like him or Cam Thomas, right? But Lillard, another, but outliers is like the thing. And, you know, we always talk about some basketball characteristics being within a market more valuable or undervalued. And I think a lot more people can shoot volume threes as a reasonable efficiency than what Dyson Daniels does. You cannot do what Wemby does, even though he's struggling offensively. Like, I've never seen a defender like him for obvious reasons. I want to see how Dyson Daniels kind of goes down, how his season and career goes down, because like this is totally unsustainable. But it is interesting.
Right. And I think sometimes with these kind of players, as they get more minutes, they have to change the way they play.
For sure.
You'll see that guys like Joel Embiid, Mitchell Robinson, as rookies, they're blocking like 6 shots per 36 minutes. As they become starters, well, you got to stay out of foul trouble. Well, you got to reserve your energy. You can't go wildly chasing every single block opportunity. Remember how Mitchell Robinson sort of like trademarked blocking threes and then just kind of stopped doing it?
Got big. It's like a third-party candidate, right? It's like, I'm going to do all the things you guys think are amazing. I am that person. And then you're like, okay, you're in power now. Can you do those things? Like, fuck no, I can't do those things. I got so many people to talk about and so many people blocking me. And I can't just do the things because I had nothing at stake, right? And being like a third party player like Mitchell Robinson as a rookie, it's like, holy shit, are we watching an outlier rim protector dunker? It's like, not when there's some actual responsibility placed on his shoulders.
When you ran for president, you promised me 5 steals per game in every pot.
Mm-hmm.
Here you are, made my starter, and I'm getting 2.7.
Yeah.
Merely half of what you promised over here on the campaign trail. He's like, I'm a regular player now, man. I'm not just like Mr. Steals. Like I gotta shoot some shots. I gotta pass the ball. Like I can't be just like steal.
Gobble, gobble, gobble. Cookies, cookies, cookies. Yeah. I mean, we'll see. I think Dyson Daniels is real. I think the East has super interesting storylines and very boring storylines. Do you think this is the dumbest question? But let me rephrase it then. Has Cleveland, is this Cleveland's vision of themselves that they've been cooking for years? Or is this kind of an outlier run where they're flipping coins and it's coming up heads every time, 11 times?
Well, what's interesting about Cleveland is that, when we looked at the Cookies Hoops Big Preview, which was excellent.
Perfect.
We didn't fully discount Cleveland, but it didn't seem as if they have necessarily solved the kind of problems that they've had in the past. Mm-hmm. And their personnel is really no different. They'd had some, in my opinion, redundancy issues where you looked at them and you said, well, you got 2 non-shooting bigs. You got 2 guards who are both sort of small, who seem to, need the ball in their hands. And they didn't change that. And yet their offense is outrageous.
Without their sharpshooter. Bogdanovich is still injured. Which one? I have no idea.
But they have a better offense than the Warriors, than the Knicks, than the Celtics, than the Nuggets. Anybody. They have an offensive rating of 122.
Yeah. Insane. Garland looks like the Garland from 2 years ago. He was injured last year and kind of was frustrated. But, my thought with them is, are they all hitting their stride at the same point? And when I say all, I just mean, 3 players. We know what Mitchell is. He's a known. But Garland, Jared Allen, and Evan Mobley all kind of matured into the players we wanted them to be. Up until this season, I would argue it was whether Jared Allen, his nerves got to him. Famously, the lights were too bright. But he's a good player. Evan Mobley looked kind of skinny in the playoffs last year and he needs to be more aggressive. I hate that word. And I was questioning the size and skill set of Garland. All 3 of those players kind of formed into their basketball bodies.
They're just running a zillion efficient guys out there. Mitchell, Mobley, Allen, Garland. Okoro's been efficient. Sam Merrill's efficient. LeVert's been efficient. It's just wild.
But you know what I mean? Look, they're all on the arc, hitting the arc at the same time.
No, I'm agreeing with you. Are you saying at the moment or of their career?
Of their career. They're no longer younger players, right? They're no longer players with unknowns. This was the season for, maybe including Okoro, all 4 of those guys. You guys are paid. You guys are known commodities. A few of you have been all-stars at one point. What are you? Are you good or are you just going to be good? And they're kind of all on that point in their arc of their careers.
I think that's true and a contributing factor. Also, we're still at that point where there's some wonky 3-point shooting that dictates offensive and defensive ratings, or teams that look inordinately good or teams that really struggle. The idea that they'd shoot 42% from 3 for the year, very unlikely. Last year the best 3-point shooting teams were OKC at 39%, Boston 39%, Timberwolves 39%. The fact that they'd shoot 42 and just blow that out of the water with this personnel seems unlikely. Like, I just don't think that's going to be the case. And, I mean, you could say the same thing about their 2-point shooting percentage. I mean, they're shooting like over 60%, and the best teams last year shot 59%. So even with the increase of offensive efficiency, 3-point shooting, 2-point shooting, field goal percentages overall don't shift that dramatically. And theirs is just like through the roof in like a totally obscene way that I just don't necessarily buy.
I agree with that too. And like, we're too early in the season where they could just lose 3 games in a row and tumble down the weak ass East standings. But and there's certain good teams, like we talked about, that have yet to flex. Even Indiana, like Halliburton finally looks good, you know, and Mathurin, they're uncovering Mathurin because of I think Nemhard's injury, right? So they've gotten deeper. The Knicks are suffering from minor but significant injuries that are really, in my opinion, limiting what they do. So I still want to see it. I don't expect Brooklyn to be this good. I don't expect Cleveland to be this good. And I expect certain teams to start stealing some games and siphoning some victories and climbing up the standings.
Well, last thing I would say about Cleveland is that, you know, metrics really like them going into this year. They were a team that projected by a lot of metrics models to being the second best in the East after Boston. So them going out with a great start wouldn't be surprising according to those models, and not giving them any more, you know, credence than they should have. There was at least some prediction of this, that the Cavs were going to be extremely good. And my main thing is, I just don't think that, you know, a team is going to shoot like 52% from the floor when it's never been done before, and the team that's going to do it would be the 2025 Cleveland Cavs. But
wow,
that said,
the dreaded regression to the mean, huh?
But that said, we're breaking offensive, you know, records every year. So fuck it, Cleveland
Where's
Cavs.
the mean?
Best offense in history, best 3-point shooting in history, best 2-point shooting in history, best field goal percentage in history. Loading.
Does the NBA have an East Coast bias problem? Because like, it is a poor conference currently, and there's some juggernauts in the in the West. But like, are we excited about the Suns and the Thunder? I mean, we are, but like, there's some good teams out there. The Warriors look incredible, but we're already post Warriors fatigue, right? Like, we're already done talking about Klay Thompson leaving the franchise, finally breaking up the Splash Brothers. Like, are we ready to talk about their insane offense and like Kuminga? Like, are there not good enough storylines in the NBA to start this season?
I mean, I think the lack of storylines is a big deal, and I think that's mostly what the discontent about 3-point shooting was actually about. The BMM was coming off of a win. They didn't have any teams to break up. They didn't have any, you know, axes to swing. They didn't have any. They didn't have any ammo. They were just on you know, self-congratulatory mode.
High on that corned beef.
Yeah, just jerking their own guys off, you know.
Whoa, hey, that's not an exclusively Irish thing.
Dude, my culture's not a costume. But you know, the BMM was very self-satisfied. So there were very few storylines other than like, how good are the Celtics? Aren't they amazing? You know who's really cool? Their coach. Isn't he crazy? He's a psycho. I know. He's a basketball coach, bro. He's a basketball coach. Yeah, but he said something about blood.
I do love him quite a bit, though. Missoula is the best.
No, he's great. He's cool. I like him. I just mean, like, there was no real story, but now they've got to figure out a way to take this Cavs team apart. Like the They're over
Yeah,
there.
super weird. Yeah.
They got their shamrocks. They got their shenanigans. Like, all right, we got to turn Mitchell against Mobley. I think. Or no, when are they going to trade Jared Allen? He wants out.
It's the classic, the BMM doing that classic conservative playbook stuff, right? Turn the Cleveland Cavaliers fan base against each other. But
Divide and conquer.
did you see what Brian Windhorst says? Not that I care about media people, but it was interesting because
Wow.
I don't follow Stephen A. Smith. I enjoy Stephen A. Smith. I like what he talks about, but we're not rooting for Wojnarowski versus Shams, right? Come on now. But
No.
anyway, so Windhorst, who I like, is like the NBA is in a bad place storytelling wise, the S word, because of the hot take, because of social media. We just want the engagement. We just want the instant sugar high of being like, so and so sucks. Someone got owned, posterized, and we're not talking about like the fabric and richness of the NBA. Do you think he's right?
No.
That was a test, and you passed.
I just think we're early in the season. There usually aren't a lot of incredible storylines that materialize. I mean, this is why the league started the in-season tournament to spark interest in the NBA at a time when most people, other than huge dorks like ourselves, are not paying attention to it. And granted, there is a larger basketball audience that's more vocal, that wants these discussions and was dying for them. You know, oh, all right, the Olympics, WNBA. Yes, the NBA is here. Let's get it fired up. And it's like, I don't know, man. The Celtics won in a fairly underwhelming, unrewarding postseason that no one really enjoyed. We got some guys like Kawhi who are injured. We got guys like Embiid are injured. I don't know. We're just waiting to get these, so the plot lines cooking. And maybe we've started that, right? Like Jokic has been unbelievable. He's back to being like just absolute god level. The Suns look really good. The Cavs look really good. Like we're building some stuff.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and also to his point, if he's talking about the NBA in general through these seasons, it's a misunderstanding of the audience, right? It's like when music haters are like, I miss albums, I miss album art, I miss 12 songs. Now we have just streaming singles, and no one listens to the fourth track, if they're sandwiched by hits. And when Windhorst talks about that, my first thought is like, well, you're the person to write these stories, and I know you do, but also these stories that we all write are the same stories over and over, right? Jordan originalism, we always talk about that. We tried to write a book, and we did so perfectly, that tried to avoid all these expectations and cliches, and put some sort of modern thinking into it. And this coincides with my whole predisposition and obsession with the people who write about things not doing their end of the bargain, not putting up their end of the bargain. And I think until we can make a documentary series that isn't just like, look how hard someone works and look what they've overcome, we don't need them. We just need clips.
I also think that the reality now is different from the reality not only of the past, not only because of the way that publications and media have shifted.
Definitely.
Way back in the day, and this isn't even recent, but way back in the day, you might read a profile in Sports Illustrated that's, 3,000 words with some cool photos about a player you didn't know much about. And that's what we all read. And we all read it, and we all recalled it, and that became sort of the lore of this guy.
Shout out to Mina Kimes and the Nacho King, Luka Doncic, right?
Yeah, and this goes back to childhood, and that was how I'm sure Windhorst thinks about things when he says richer, in-depth coverage. Yeah, he's a writer. This is how he's
And
thinking
he
of.
wrote about LeBron James, the most flowery athlete ever, right?
This is how he's thinking of the way that we process and get to know athletes. I would say the biggest difference is that social media is allowed athletes to define themselves. We know way more about these athletes than we used to, about their personalities and what they're into. Some of them are still obviously guarded, but it's just a different way of learning about them that doesn't necessarily have gatekeepers that can present these athletes in as interesting ways or in in shitty ways. Not every reporter was doing God's work out there. Like there's plenty of bad ones, but I just mean to learn about the personality of a player in the past. Someone kind of had to give you that entry point, and at this point, you don't need that anymore.
Yeah, you talking about that made me think of like if I was an editor at a website and we had resources like take photos, get a good writer to track Zach Eady down and talk about his journey from as a young man who's like taller than everyone, Asian American finds out, and like college player of the year, doubted, drafted in Memphis, and then two ethical geniuses like ourselves ramble about him last week for 15, 20 minutes discussing all this really quickly. While it might take that publication weeks. And then he has a game that kind of makes it all irrelevant. Well, not irrelevant, but it changes the narrative of what we were talking about. Time has gotten so fast, and the gaps between the things we remember are so short now that there is no reality that Windhorst is talking about, right?
That's a good way of looking at it. To me, thinking about my own history with writing, and when I first started writing for The Ringer and then Grantland, I was coming from a history not of blogging, but of writing for print magazines and then the New York Times. So print magazines, as you know from your own history, the lead time was crazy. It could be 2-3 months. It could be, there was a long period of time between the writing and publication. And then, of course, when you got paid, New York Times sped that up and it was like, hey, it's like 5 days later. You can do it on Tuesday and it's going to come out by Sunday. You're like, wow, the future is here. Then, of course, with a website, you write it and it's up. But I felt like a lot of the writing for websites didn't keep up with sort of the journalistic practices, if that makes sense. Most people who weren't really used to jumping on the phone and calling people. Most people weren't really used to fact checking, wanting to go there and create a scene. It was so much based on opinions. And I don't think that's a negative thing, but I think it did change about this idea of like, I'm a fly on the wall with this athlete or this musician or whoever you want to do it, to here's how I feel about them. I think there was a change in that, and kind of the millennials or the younger millennials and people who are bloggers really ushered that in. It's like, here's a profile on this incredible person, but it's really about me.
And that's an arms race. And this is kind of where I come from when I work by myself in my studio making paintings. It's like, well, if it's not about me, then I've kind of failed in a way. But then when I think about politics or food or sports, it's a different mentality than what I'm used to your point. Like I'm used to the fly on the wall, the color, the painting the picture of truth and reality, and kind of like putting your spin on it inside that, in those framings, those walls. But it's an arms race now, right? Because you might be just this incredible writer doing this thing about Zach Eady, and then people are commenting not only week to week, game to game, soundbite to soundbite, possession to possession. And it's just like, holy shit, if I don't speed up, I'm just going to lose this very simple race.
I mean, I know this would be predictable, but wouldn't you read the hell out of a story about going to like a Chinese restaurant in Memphis with Zach Eady?
1,000%, right?
Yeah.
But
Like I'm like, oh, we're going in. Like he ducks in to get into the restaurant. He goes there. What is he ordering? Is he using chopsticks? Like, come on, give it to me. I want the fly on the wall. Zach Eady at a Memphis Chinese restaurant ordering some some fried chicken wings.
yeah. And then
classic.
two things happen, right? That article comes out and someone picks out the funniest thing and makes it their own.
Right.
Or I know someone doing that, and I'm just going to make up a bunch of jokes about Zach Eady in a Chinese restaurant. And it's not based on truth. So it can have so many liberties and be funny, shocking, whatever I want it to be. Not that I can do that. That's a skill that other people have. But it's like, is the guitar really dead?
You know what else isn't based on truth, but has a lot of humor and takes a lot of liberties?
New York liberties. Cookies.
Cookies.
I love cookies. I love cookies.